migration.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Tout d'abord, merci pour cette introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your introduction. Together with Sandro Peduzzi, we will talk about estuaries, and I will mainly focus on the theoretical aspects. Mr. Peduzzi will then talk about the practical side of things. There are three questions we would like to ask in the beginning, and these were the questions we were confronted with when we developed this paper, and these three questions also accompany us through our presentation. First, how important are estuaries in the river network? Then, what state are estuaries in Switzerland? And thirdly, what measures should be taken for revitalization? Let us now look at the first question, the importance of estuaries. We do know that in the river network, in the water system, the estuaries are nodal points. They are of major importance for the lateral and longitudinal connectivity of the river system. They have a high hydrodynamic complexity, which is also related to the transport of sediments. So through these sediments there's erosion, which then again has an influence on the state of these estuaries. And it's also important that the organic elements that are taken with the stream must be taken into account. And then there are other key parameters like the flow volumes, flow velocity that are changing depending on the time of year. And we know that most flows in Switzerland were made subject to correction, so the human beings changed the flow of the rivers, and as a result, rivers that used to be very wide were made narrower and pressed into a tight system, and this had major structural effects on the ecosystem as a whole. Here is one example. So this is a picture from the 18th century and a picture from today. So you see how the river flow was in the past and how straight it is now. If you want to talk about the state of the estuaries, I would like to talk about the River Rhône. Mr. Bourgeois said in 2006 something about the current state. This was about the connectivity. And there they considered building a structure, and they looked at ecomorphology and checked to what degree there are already structures in the canal, then what's the quality of the water, and connectivity, which is often very critical because there are different barriers within the river. So the potential is constantly evaluated and measures for improvement. And we have seen that in most cases the state is rather critical, and we have a big number of estuaries where measures need to be taken. Some examples here: Avançon and inflow into the river Rhône. There we see that there is no real connection. There are rocks in the estuary zone. But then, example of the Bourne, here we see that the estuary is very narrow. With Navissance, we see that this is now a real canal, and Lonza, there we have a barrier in the estuary. And we worked with Professor Schleiss on a paper and considered what measures could be taken for revitalization of the rivers. The idea was that we contribute to these equation. Heterogeneity plus variability plus connectivity is biodiversity. So that we broaden the estuary, create new habitats for invertebrates, plants, fish, which is like a protective area for the fish, especially when flow velocities increase. For instance, during the period when the snow is melting, or when there's increased velocity of the flow because of the turbine activity. This way we wanted to increase the number of the populations and ensure connectivity. We ran this study on the basis of laboratory tests. So we took a 90-degree angle estuary as a reference. So we had this influent in a 90-degree angle. This is very often the case in nature too. We used as a basis a constant velocity of flow, and of course we also took into account the transport of sediments. The details, I won't talk about details here because it's very complex. But what is important is that in a broadened area, as you can see on the picture here, there are different channels. You can see that here in the estuary area, then there's an area where there's strong stagnation. Then there are areas that dry out faster. And as a result, the depth of the water is different, which leads to different outflow velocities. So when you broaden a river or not, we have different reference values for that, and see how the velocity of the water flow is changing. But also here I do not want to go into detail. We wanted to show that you cannot only, or should not only, focus on the estuary. We used a different curve here, which we calculated for the estuary region. And there we found that it could almost be halved. So this refers to the broadening and sediments. And the light blue line, S6, there, this shows you the situation when the river almost dries out. In order to come to the end of this first part, I would like to add that if we broaden the estuary, if we enlarge it, we can achieve a satisfactory result, which is not too cost intensive, and it is important for creating a lateral connection. And this is good because thereby you avoid the existing barriers. So we need to enlarge estuaries by factor 3, and the length enlarged by 4. And furthermore, it is important to tell you that this enlargement had no negative impact on flooding events, and this is also important when talking about revitalization. A progressive broadening can also be of functional importance, but this depends on the space you have available. What is important with a revitalization project is that there must be enough space for the transport of sediments and that the morphodynamics in the estuary remains intact. Thank you very much. This was my part, and I will now hand over to my colleague Sandro Peduzzi. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would also like to welcome you and would also like to thank the organizers for having invited a representative from the cantons. We heard it this morning. The cantons are currently very occupied with the planning for the revitalization and redevelopment. So, because this is all planned to be completed by the end of the year. Today, I want to tell you what considerations we make to improve the situation in the estuaries, what aspects need to be taken into account, what do we need to do with the estuaries, because this needs to be taken into account in our planning. So, there are two kinds of estuaries. We saw that there are estuaries, lateral estuaries, if one river flows into another one, and then there are estuaries when a river flows into a lake. Both exist in Switzerland and both need to be regarded. This is a very beautiful picture of Lago Maggiore in the Ticino canton. You can see here a picture that seems to be very natural, but I must say that this is a major project that was run in this region, and we revitalized the estuary there. You heard it this morning. This is about a big machinery related to all that. The legal framework has changed, and for this reason, quite a few things are new now. And so we in the cantons are currently working on the planning to see what we or how we will develop in the next few years with regard to revitalization. I think this is a topic that was long underestimated. And also clearing the rivers from obstacles and guaranteeing possibility for fish. These are things that need to be focused on. So there are barriers that are hydroenergy related, but also other barriers, structures in the rivers or close to the rivers, and all this plays a role when we set up a strategy for revitalization. So let us look at the guidelines here. I looked for the words estuary, influent, or tributary. I found them only once or twice in these papers. This shows that people did look at the topic, but completely underestimated it. I referred to a 2012 document. Of course, the Federal Office of the Environment also published other manuals and guidelines. And the problem of connectivity was looked at from a different perspective and is now of a greater priority. So there are 3 brochures now in which connectivity plays a role. There's one brochure on connectivity, there's a second one on the enlargement of estuaries. And my colleague Marcello Leite, he wrote this paper. And then there's a third manual on rock ramps. And we discussed a lot on how we can include the redevelopment of barriers into our planning. Let's look at the state here, the current state of these barriers. You heard it already. They are in a rather bad state. Here you have the Magadino Plains, Locarno. You have the Ticino here, the river that was completely straightened, almost straightened. You have the riverbed and the environment of the river. And this is a typical situation for the rivers flowing through our alpine plains. There you have the actual riverbed. Then you have the environment of the river, which is now completely detached from the actual riverbed. And this is a situation you find quite often. So often you have these concrete channels now in which the rivers are flowing, and then they flow into the aquatic environment. But this often happens via a big barrier. They have to cover a certain height. So what did we do? Regarding the revitalization planning, the federal government asked us to estimate what benefits would result for nature or for the landscape. So what will happen when we revitalize? And this holds true for all the rivers and streams. We try to do exactly this and set up a list of priorities. So we also thought about expected costs of ecomorphology. And here you need to take into account different aspects, namely, as I said, ecomorphology. So how high are the barriers? How are they? What dimensions do they have? What kinds of obstacles are these? And this is all related to the redevelopment cost. And then we looked at this against the backdrop of the hydromorphological potential, looked at the slope in this river section, the length of the river that needs to be connected, then the Strahler stream order number. This all needs to be taken into account for the different sections of the river. Then we also drafted a list of water bodies that are of the utmost priority. So in red here are the critical areas. And this is important to deal with obstacles first that are of major ecological importance, but this has financial consequences. The priorities are get additional subsidies from the federal government. And some other consideration that played a role in our planning, you need to find what obstacles, or if you clear the obstacles, how can we assure better connectivity? So here you see the different kinds of obstacles we found. And then we took the potential length to be connected, if you want to call it like that. So we will focus on the obstacles that bring the most benefits. So where we can create the longest connected flow, so to speak, in order to guarantee connectivity. So this is what the result looks like, at least in our planning. This is this red square there. We have an obstacle. That is one of the priorities in our planning. And then this section, which is in the river environment of the river Ticino, and needs to be revitalized. And one more thing. When planning such things, and we already published this, then we decided, or it was decided, that we should do something about that. And I must say that the Swiss Federal Railway Company is considering building new tracks in this area, so this is also of national importance, and so it is all the more important to talk about ecological compensation measures. So the Federal Railways took up our idea, and they will therefore propose the revitalization of this river section in their planning that they have to submit to the government. Because it is really important that something is done there, because here fish are hindered from migrating. And such projects must be conducted, carried out in different areas. We need a project, an extensive project from source to estuary, but this would be too much if we all this together. So the canton needs to define what part is used as compensation measures, where to become active, what can be financed with the means provided by the federal government. And one more thing that I need to add. This estuary redevelopment, especially in the aquatic environment, this is not so problematic with regard to space available. There, the revitalization in Switzerland is easy or easier because we do have the necessary space. So this was a first measure here, which did not result in any conflicts regarding use of space. There are other situations in other regions where there's much more conflict about that, and there in this section we were able to already carry out the revitalization measures. And as I said, there are also estuaries of rivers flowing into lakes, and they are also in a rather poor state. The estuary of a river into a lake is, in my opinion, even more critical than from river to river. So we are here at the interface between the river system and the stagnant water. And the changes in the legislation also result in strategic planning that has to be developed for the next few years, and this is also for the revitalization of stagnant waters. And we took that into account in our own planning. Our objective is that we get diversity at the morphological level. Again, as you can see on the right picture, on the picture on the right, Here you see one part of Lago Maggiore, and in these densely populated areas we find that revitalization works can be connected to other things, so create recreation areas that can be used, and so this has major potential here. So these are densely populated areas, and people appreciate it very much if these estuaries become more attractive through revitalization, more attractive to people, and then they are better accepted by the population, and they are more willing to support such projects. And the red dots show you where we have estuaries into the lake that need to be revitalized. And regarding the revitalization of estuaries from river into lake, I can show you one that was revitalized already in the past. This is one estuary in a densely built up area in a park in the city of Lugano. And here you see Caserate, that is the river flowing into the lake, and on the right hand side you see the park. And there you see the separation between the park and the lake. So you see this wall there, right? And this wall separates the two, and now you can see a picture of the situation today. So we restored connectivity of the entire ecosystem. We built this path out of wood, and access to the lake is now much easier. And in another part, we also broadened, enlarged the river bed shortly before the estuary. You see the two big walls there, and there construction works were carried out, and we enlarged the bed. On the right hand side you can see that we have a natural shore again, so the structure in the estuary area has changed, and this makes access to the river easier again. And it is easier for people to go to the river. This project was rather controversial, but this is usually the case with revitalization projects. But as soon as we become really active, implement the change, people see that the situation changes to the better. At the beginning, they are always skeptical. They even had a referendum on that. So the citizens of Lugano were asked to comment on this project. And they then voted yes, so we were allowed to do the revitalization. And here I have a different example. This is about the revitalization of the Ticino estuary, also in the Magadino plain. And the picture on top shows the situation before revitalization. So the first step of the works conducted was that this was a gravel and sand factory directly in the estuary area there. You can see it there, the white bit. And the first step was that we made some changes there, but this took several decades with a lot of conflict. There are even people here in the audience who know about that. However, we reached our objective, and we were able to change this area there to clear the obstacles, and thus the dynamics in the river changed again. The river is now in a better, more favorable state to reintroduce the natural structures. You see it on the picture down there. This island was made smaller, and on the right there was a bypass created. That was a project from 2009. This is the situation before the project. But the gravel plant was already dismantled there, so they no longer took any material out of the river. And then you can see the arrows here. Different measures were taken. So here we have a shore zone, a riverbank zone, and then this was the basis for this bypass. And this entire area thus gained new dynamics, and the ecosystem was brought back into balance, or a new balance was created. So, last but not least, one nice picture after the implementation of a revitalization project. Here you see this is where this gravel plant was, and now everything looks much more natural again. Better environment now. If you compare that to the situation before, I think this looks completely different now. The entire area was revitalized. One more thing, down there you see the picture of the estuary with some flooding there, and then you see the Visaska estuary, a different river flowing into the Magadino plain. And in the bottom area you see that the river has found its own way again, and up there you see a highway before the river is flowing into the lake, and you can see it directly. Or you could say that it is good if we make changes to morphology, but this is not enough. And the legal framework takes this into account in Switzerland. It is recommended that we redevelop the entire hydrological system and also take into account the bed loads. So this is important because the river valley is limited. The bed load balance was no longer there in a natural way, so this affected the transport of sediments, and now we have the natural environment again. That was it from my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this led to new questions in your own minds, maybe, because it is important that all these theoretical aspects we're talking about today are seen against a practical backdrop. Because what you are planning at the theoretical level then leads to concrete projects. Thank you very much.